All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Being Patient's live talk. And I'm Nicholas with Being Patient. And today we're going to be speaking with Dewayne Nash, who's a retired family physician who was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's. And we'll be talking about his experience living with Alzheimer's. So Dewayne, thanks so much for joining us. I'm really excited to have our conversation. So Dewayne, I just want to start off with, looking back, what were the earliest symptoms of Alzheimer's that you experienced?
Well, my case is a little different, I think, because I was accidentally diagnosed. And at the time I was diagnosed, I really didn't feel like I was having any symptoms. I volunteered to be in the normal control group of the Alzheimer's disease neuroimaging Alzheimer's research study, and I was going to be in the normal group. And when they did the memory test in the neuropsych exam, it was about a two-hour exam. I noticed some things. I noticed was that they gave me 10 words to remember, and I had to repeat them back to them, and I could only get 5 right. And about 2 years before, when I applied for my long-term care insurance, they gave me 10 words, and I got all 10 of them just like that. That was disturbing. And then they flash you pictures of different objects. And there are probably 20 things that we all should recognize. But there was 5 of them that I was totally blocked on. I couldn't recognize them. And in fact, I could almost tell you the 5 right now because I remember them now. And then there was, of course, they do spatial stuff where you have to draw complicated diagrams. I had difficulty doing that. And then I had difficulty, they gave these little blocks and you have to make designs with them. And I had difficulty doing those. And I can remember it's where they always did my neuropsych exam. I probably had 10 of them in that room, and looking out, and I can remember getting real cold and sweaty because that was the moment when I knew that I had a memory issue. That's the moment.
Right.
Did I recognize anything? No. I talked to my nurses, my patients, my family, and no one really noticed anything. But looking back, some things that I noticed was there were some things that I didn't remember about patients. I didn't think much about it at the time, but thinking about it was things I should have remembered. And then I had some difficulties doing my last CME, continuing medical education course online. And I scored real bad. I passed, but barely passed. And I usually got a higher score. And that was disturbing at the time because in the back of my mind, if you got in a family like I do, you're always worried for, is this the time for this to happen? And that's when those are the symptoms that I noticed. And I think I basically got diagnosed earlier than most people do.
Right.
What would happen probably to me is I'd stayed in practice and I would work, and I've been working, and maybe 2 years down the line when my memory did drop off some, maybe I'd start making mistakes. That's how things show up, where people at work, they start making mistakes or forget stuff and things like that.
Right. And so, like you mentioned, right, you actually found out as you enrolled into ADNI, which is the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative.
Right.
Originally, you wanted to be a healthy control participant. And at that time,
and the reason I entered that study is because of my real strong family history. And I decided when I reached 60 that I was going to be seen on a regular basis. And they said, why don't you volunteer for this study and we'll put you in the normal control group. And that's why I went up there, just because of my family history. And I want to be monitored on a regular basis.
Right. And at the time, you were still practicing as a physician?
I was still practicing full-blown 20, 30 patients a day.
Right. And during this, in that study, when they were doing the neuropsych testing and found out there were some issues, I'm assuming then they referred you on to a neurologist for.
They recommended I see a neurologist, and I elected to be seen there. At that time, I was at the University of Texas Southwestern in Dallas, and I decided to be seen there. by one of the staff neurologists. So that's who I saw.
Right. And you mentioned about your family history of Alzheimer's.
Correct.
Can you tell us a bit more about that? And did you ever expect that you yourself would also eventually get Alzheimer's?
Yes, I really figured I would. And one of my horrors, if you will, was that it would sneak up on you and you wouldn't be aware of it. And that because I did do things, writing prescriptions and things like that. You can harm someone. That I would start making mistakes and not realize it. That was one of my horrors. And I really felt like it would probably happen to me, but I was really expecting to be, in my 70s or 80s. However, my younger brother, he just died 8 years ago. Yesterday was his anniversary of his death. And he's a year younger than me, exactly a year younger than me. We were kind of like twins growing up. And he was diagnosed at 55, died in the final stages at 63. And then my mother was diagnosed and she died a few years before I was diagnosed. And so that's way back there in the back of your mind. And it was in the back of my mind all the time.
Right. So you expect it to eventually have Alzheimer's?
I expect it to eventually happen, correct.
Would it happen a lot earlier than you would expect?
It happened a lot earlier, because I look at the late onset Alzheimer's graphs from the ADNI study, and you can just trace it out, and you can see when you should get MCI, when your MRI is abnormal, and you can see when all those things should happen, and it should happen to me on my early 70s, mid 70s maybe.
Right. So what was that like for you? Because after you were diagnosed with MCI, you retired as a family physician, and that retirement, I'm assuming, came earlier than you expected. Like, how was that difficult for you? What was that like?
Well, the day they did the memory testing on me, I knew I had it. When I was doing that memory test, and they didn't have to give me the results. It took 3 weeks to get the report back. But I knew, I said, no, I told my wife, I said, on the way home, I said, no, I've got it. And so it gave me a month to prepare because I knew, and then they told me, when they finally called me, they said, well, you need to see a neurologist. So they made me an appointment. So I had a month gap there. And so I said, okay, I'm stopping. But I'm waiting until I officially see the neurologist. And I went ahead for that month. My patients are probably listening here, and they may not know all this, but I refilled people's prescriptions into the future. I had people like babies come in, kids come in for their well-child checkups and things like that, and physicals and their rechecks. And I started in my mind saying, this patient really, I got to see this doctor and this doctor and this doctor. And then maybe if I was taking care of somebody that really ought to be seeing a cardiologist, I would say, why don't you go see the cardiologist for your chest pain instead of letting me manage it? And I started shifting people away from me. And so I had a month to prepare, but still, and there's a story that I usually cry when I tell all these stories, so bear with me. But the night before I saw the neurologist at 5 o'clock, that one of the nurses working with me, her son must do a 2-year checkup. And I told her, I said, go get your son and bring him up here. I'm going to do a 2-year checkup on him. So at 5 o'clock, when the office is closed, I did the 2-year checkup. And because no one knew I was going to leave yet. And so I'm going to get the official word. And so the next day I saw the neurologist, and she looked at everything because I did some MRI and a carotid scan and all the diagnostic tests she wanted me to have done. I brought it with me. And she gave me the diagnosis and gave me a prescription for the Aricept. And I knew that there was no way I could be practicing with that. So on the way, when I got home, I called the head of the clinic and told him, I said, I've got MCI, it's probably Alzheimer's disease, and I'm put on Aricept, and I'm really not going to practice anymore. So I never returned back. And I did write a blog that day that to my patients. because a lot of them read my patients and they were referred to my blog and they read it, and that was very difficult to write. And I cry every time. I cried when I wrote it, and every year I look at it again, and I cry every time. So yeah, it was very difficult because I dream almost every night. But since I retired, I dream about being a physician, seeing patients and things like that.
Right. And I think for a lot of people who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's while they're still working at that period, and then losing that structure of work is extremely difficult. How did you manage your life shortly after, what was that like for you in terms of losing that structure?
Well, I in my mind, I had planned on retiring 5 years at 65 instead of 60. And so we had moved out into the countryside north of Austin, and we had 10 acres and we had some animals there and I had a big garden, and I did a lot of country living type stuff. And so that was my project during retirement. And so I started on that, fencing and putting in roofing and all that kind of stuff. I did most of it myself. And so when I retired, I just went right into doing that. And then I said, okay, I'd always wanted to volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association. At that time it was Alzheimer's Texas. And then I always wanted to do Meals on Wheels because my mother got Meals on Wheels. So I volunteered with them. And I did Habitat for Humanity. And so I turned into volunteering in my ranch work, if you want to call that, gardening. And we traveled, we bumped up our traveling. We traveled, we tried to do 2 good trips a year. And so I stayed real busy. And I went on to, I never was on social media at all when I was in practice. But once I retired, I got on social media. I got on Facebook and Twitter, and I connected with a lot of my patients and things, and they still, like I had one today, asked me questions about Alzheimer's because of the family members. They Facebook me, and I gave them advice what to do with their family.
And I want to ask you a little bit about your blog. We were just speaking about it a little bit before this interview.
Correct.
You mentioned that you actually started your blog, the Organic Green Doctor, before your diagnosis and before that you had MCI. And yeah, can you tell us a little bit about how you came to start that blog, and that coincidence of you writing about MCI and eventually actually getting it?
Well, I'd always said, my wife kept telling me, said, you could do a blog. And so there was a PBS show on about this person that just started the blog one day, and she told how she did it, and she recommended people do it. And she said, come here, I recorded this for you. And I watched, and I said, okay. And so I started the blog. And so I always wanted to do it, and I wanted to write about medical things and organic gardening. I wanted to write about conservation, green living, like rainwater harvesting, recycling, solar energy and stuff like that. And then I always look for funny things. Like if I see something funny about duct tape, I tend to write about it. They call me the duct tape doctor. And my patients did. And the Donald Duck Doctor. And so I got started that way. And then, like I was telling you before, like in September, October, before I was diagnosed, I would write some on Alzheimer's disease because of my family history. But I wrote a blog about MCI, mild cognitive impairment. And I've gone back and read that, and then 3 months later, I was diagnosed with it. And I had no idea. It was real surreal when I go back and read it. And I occasionally go back and read it just to see what I wrote, because I had to research it because I didn't quite understand it as much as I do now. Mm-hmm. And so I did that, and I wrote. Sometimes I'd write about like if the flu was going around, I wrote about that and what you could do and stuff like that. Try not to give medical advice though. And then when I was diagnosed, I try to write about Alzheimer's disease at least twice a week. And now I'm going, because there's a journalist that interviewed me when I was first diagnosed there in Austin. And she contacted me about 3 years ago and said, you should take your old blogs on Alzheimer's disease and write a book. And so I'm not really a writer. So what I do is I go back and read old blogs. And it's really it's like reading your journal 10 years ago. So I go back and read what I was thinking in 2013. And then I write about what I'm thinking today about that subject. And so I do that once a week also. And then I write on whatever Alzheimer's topic is relevant. I write about that once a week. Right. And then try to write on COVID once a week because I keep up with that. And then what I write about, I still write about gardening. And I try to stay away from politics.
Right. And I'm sure it's also a nice way, like you mentioned before, a nice way for your former patients to see how you're doing, right?
And also sometimes I'll write a blog like on Alzheimer's disease, and I know a certain person will be reading my blog, and maybe they've asked me lots of questions about it, and I write that blog just for that patient. I don't say that, but that's why I wrote it. It was for that person. Mm. Or someone will ask me lots of questions. They'll contact me through Facebook and they want to know what they should do about being worked up. And so I'll write a blog. My next blog will be what to do to be evaluated.
Right.
And make sure you do it right.
And recently you wrote about how an early diagnosis of Alzheimer's has actually helped you plan for your life and take care of your own health. Can you tell us more about your thoughts on that in terms of how an early diagnosis has helped you in your life?
I think that I'm glad I know because I always wonder about when would I have been diagnosed if I hadn't volunteered for that study? When would I said, okay, it's time for me to go in? And my memory did drop off for 2 or 3 years. It might have been, after 2 or 3 years. But some things are that it's like getting shocked. You wakes you up. And I was always pretty good about taking care of your health, but I got really aggressive with it. So I really changed my diet. I try to do the MIND diet, the MIND diet, the version of the Mediterranean. A lot of veg. I'm a 90% vegetarian. I've been messing, hadn't really been on blood pressure medicine before. My blood pressure would kind of be okay, and then it wouldn't be. So my doctor, my primary care doctor, put me on blood pressure medicine. We got real aggressive with my cholesterol, got my LDL real down low. I've controlled my weight real well. I'm very active. I stay, very active. I do all those healthy things that you're supposed to do to be healthy, but also to slow down the disease. And I think that helped me a lot. I also got on Aricept earlier than most people probably got on it. Because once I was diagnosed, they said, we want to put you on this. And I went ahead and got on it. And I've read some things that says that the earlier you get on the disease, the longer the Alzheimer's works for you to slow the process down. And I really think all this healthy living that I'm doing all those healthy things the person's supposed to do, and the Aricept or the donepezil, I think that's really has helped to slow my disease down. The other thing that I'm glad I know early is that it's made my wife and I talk about it. So we're as prepared as a couple can be for when the time comes when I'm fixing to get worse. Because we've seen it with my mother, we've seen it with my brother, and we've seen it with a lot of neighbors and friends. And we've talked about it. We've got our wills done, our power of attorney, our healthcare, everything, all that's done. And she knows when the time comes that I don't want to be any of this stuff, extra stuff done to me. It's time I want to go. And so we've been able to we have all those discussions. And I've done, over the last 10 years, I've done a lot of Alzheimer's symposiums, and given talks and been on panels. and doing a lot of Q&A sessions. And my wife usually wouldn't go with me, but she started going to a lot of them. And so she's listened to a lot of the speakers, including my self-talk. And so I think we're better off emotionally to be prepared because of knowing early. And probably the biggest benefit for me knowing early and being in the ADNI study and then getting on this Aduhelm study is that it gave me access to a drug that may slow the disease down, maybe. And I've been able to access it, 5-6 years before other people have been able to get to it. And I pretty well guaranteed at least 2 more years, if not longer, of it. So that's why I'm glad I'm diagnosed early. Right. And I was able to quit practicing before I, did harm to anybody.
Right. And I want to get back to speaking about your experience as a Aduhelm, the approved Alzheimer's drug, just in a bit. But before we do, I just want to ask, how about currently, what are the day-to-day symptoms of Alzheimer's that you experience now?
I don't have any. I'm being honest. I mean, I'm 71, so now I'm acutely aware if I can't remember a name I've always been bad at names since I was a young person, but remember things or remember a word. But all those symptoms you read about on that, about Alzheimer's, I really don't have any of them. I think a lot of what I see is due to my age. I mean, I really don't. Now if 2 or 3 years after I was diagnosed, there was a period of time when my memory scores dropped off, and then for a while it dropped off, and then it gradually seemed to kick in, and for the last few years, my memory has been, when I do the MOCA, the MOCA test, the memory test, my memory is in the normal value. It was not that way when I was first diagnosed. It was in the MCI range, and then it even dropped down for a couple of years, and then it started picking back up again. So something happened. I don't know what it was, but I attribute it to the air cell and all the healthy living that I did, I presume.
Right. So like you said, right, it's really helped to have an early diagnosis so that you get air cell.
I think so.
And your lifestyle changes as well, right, to help.
Yeah, and the other benefit is that it woke up a lot of my family members and friends and patients too. And it's made them more acutely aware because they read my blog and they've listened to my lectures and stuff, my talks, and they're all taking care of the health and getting evaluated on a regular basis, and so far they're all doing pretty good.
Got it. And let's talk about Aduhelm now. Like,
yes,
what motivated you at first to join the clinical trial of Aduhelm?
Well, I was in the ADNI study. In the ADNI study, it's all diagnostic testing. There's no drugs involved. And a lot of the diagnostics, a lot of it you can't, at that time, you couldn't get in the private world. And now you can, it's just some of it, the insurance doesn't pay for it. And so I was doing the ADNI study, and at the end of the 5 years, at the end of the study, I decided, okay, I did my part on the diagnostic testing. I'm not getting into another study unless it's going to be a drug that has the potential to help me. So I started looking through research, and I identified this drug, Aduhelm or aducanumab, back probably in 2013. I went back and I actually wrote blogs about it, and I went back and read my blog recently. It was around 2013 when I identified that they were, the research is ongoing. So I started monitoring. In fact, they at the University of Texas at Southwestern, they thought that they were going to get the drug study to start with them about a year after the ADNI study was finished. And I had them cancel the last amyloid PET scan because if you had that too close to when the Biogen started, they would delay your ability to get in the study. So we skipped that one. And so I wanted to be and so I identified that one of all the others. And it looks like so far I chose right. And so I managed to, the first time I got in, I didn't get it because you had to go online and answer questions. And the second time they actually got medical records when I did it through the university. And they Biogen got medical records and went through them and saw all my original stuff and they put it all together. And then with my recent memory testing, and I got accepted in the study in 2016, I think. It's 66, 67.
Right. And you were on the placebo at first for Aduhelm?
Yes, I did 25 infusions. So you do 18 months, and there's a placebo group and the real drug group. And at the end of 18 months, then they put everybody on the real drug. So I did 18 months, and I knew I was on the real drug for 7 months. And then all of a sudden, they stopped the study. And when they stopped the study, they had me come in and they told me that I'd got 18 months of the placebo. But I knew that I got 7 months of the real drug. So I got, they talk about the side effects of the drug, but they started me on the low dose because I know from reading the study that they started me on the low dose and worked me up to the 10. So I got at least 1 or 2 10 milligram doses, the higher dose. And then they stopped the study.
And they stopped the study, is that after the futility analysis from Biogen?
That was, yes. And they said, looks like it's not going to do what they thought it was going to do. And it was like, when I found out, because I actually went up on a Wednesday and got an infusion. And the next day they called me and said it's canceled. The study is canceled. And it was like, I felt like someone, like a horse had kicked me in the stomach. It was just like, it was, well, I've read about other people in the study. It was, everybody said, use the word devastating and getting kicked in the stomach. Because one thing this drug was giving us was some hope. And not many people, there's only 3,000 of us in the world that got this hope. I'm one of the lucky 3,000. We got some hope, and other people with Alzheimer's didn't get it. Now they have some hope. And, I think we'll all take some hope over no hope at all.
Right. And yeah, I think that's I recently spoke with another clinical trial participant and her husband about being a clinical trial participant as well, and what it was like when Biogen had to stop the study after the analysis. And like you said, I think for participants, it was just a shocker and just a massive blow, and just the hope just seemed to vanish right when they stopped the study.
Right. I mean, I knew that because I know that Aduhelm is my only chance. There won't be another chance for me. It's this drug. And I'm sure the other people realize that too. This is the drug, because the next drugs that come will be too late for me. This is it. And it was pretty devastating. But on the other end, when they reactivated it, it was the highest and super highest I've ever, I've been in this whole process when they reactivated it.
Right. So when Biogen launched a study again, you went back to get the active infusion, like the actual Aduhelm.
Correct. So I'm now my third. I do my third infusion next week of the reactivated study, and I'm guaranteed 2 years. But they more than likely, because the FDA is going to require that they study people for 8 to 9 years, they'll probably keep extending that.
Got it.
So, I'll end up getting about, 2.5 years worth of the drug, and hopefully by then they will have sorted this all out, with the pay, whether Medicare pays for it, the insurance pays for it, the cost, and some of the, how well the drug works, some of that gets sorted out by the time I get off the study.
Right. And yeah, I wanted to ask you, as as a former practicing physician, like we all know how controversial the FDA's accelerated approval of Aduhelm was. As a former practicing physician, like what are your thoughts about the FDA's decision to approve the drug?
I'm glad, let me just say, I'm glad that they approved it, and I think they should have improved it. They should have approved it. But I think they went about it wrong. It just, as I told somebody when I was interviewed, it just smells bad. They could have waited 2 or 3 years and did the studies. My guess is when this is all said and done, it's gonna slow the decline down by the 20% they're talking about. That's probably gonna be what it shows. And a lot of this controversy and that's going on with it, the way it was approved, it wouldn't have happened if they would just waited.
So you think they approved it too soon?
They approved it too soon.
Right.
I mean, really, because if you look at all these national, well-respected neurologists at all these major universities, and what they say about it. Now, a lot of them are for it, but a lot of them are against it, and that's kind of a red flag. Now, there is one doctor, and I can't remember his name. I know you guys have interviewed Salloway. Is that his name?
Dr. Stephen Salloway from
yeah. So he's the one that's treated more patients with this than anybody else in the world. And he's been treating for about 5 or 6 years or so. And he has the most experience with it. And he believes in it. And his perspective is not like everybody else's, because he's been treating people for 5 or 6 years, and he thinks he's seen the difference. And so maybe that's where we'll all be in 5 or 6 years. But they were I thought they rushed it.
Got it.
And and then the more things get hyped about it being negative, the worse it is for the drug. It'll always have that mark on it, I think. But then the drugs that are right behind it that work similar to that, they're showing they're working better, and they're going to be here in 3 to 5 years. They're going to do the study that needs to be done, and they'll be here in 3 to 5 years. And they'll probably work better than this one.
Right. And how about yourself personally? Like you've had infusions of the active treatment. Like, have you felt that it benefited at all? Like, do you have any thoughts about that?
My situation's so different because I've read, I've seen you guys interview participants, and I've read people being interviewed, and my memory issues just aren't there right now. And I can't really contribute it to the Aduhelm because I haven't had enough of the high dose yet to say that's helping. But then that's when people should be treated. Really, as it turns out, people ought to be treated like me who don't have minimal or any symptoms. You need to know before the symptoms really start strong, because the further along you get and you try to treat this, it doesn't work. Because in the study I am, about half the people that were in the study I'm at presently, half of them got that year or two delay, they progressed significantly. They advanced too far, they didn't qualify to be in the study.
Got it. And Dr. Nash, I want to shift gears a little bit away from Aduhelm, because we just have a question from the audience that I want to ask you. Edward asks, had you ever diagnosed patients with Alzheimer's? And if so, given now, what would you suggest to your colleagues about the best way to give this diagnosis to others?
Number one thing that I would tell physicians is listen to their patient, because they don't do it. Because I'm on the other side, Nancy, and I go, they're not listening to me. And I probably was the same way. I don't know, but you got to listen to the patient. And then commonly what happens when you're in a doctor, I guess is what he's after, you're in there and this is what used to happen to me. They come in for the blood pressure, cholesterol, and then at the last minute they say, oh, I'm having problems with my memory. And it's at the end of the visit. And I always encourage people to understand this much, to make an appointment with with your doctor just for memory issues only and nothing else. And then make sure the doctor listens to you and write down what your memory issues are. And if you're really having problems, bring some in with you. And then if you're a practicing physician, you need to make, you should never tell anybody that they have Alzheimer's disease unless you've done a good diagnostic workup and you're really sure. In 2021, you should be able to tell someone if they have Alzheimer's disease or not. And there's a diagnostic testing available. And you have to do, a good examination, a good history, a good memory test, good screening labs, if needed, a neuropsych exam, if needed, an MRI. And then if you hadn't come up with a diagnosis, you can, of course, the insurance doesn't pay for these. You can do the amyloid PET scans. And if it's positive, if you got Alzheimer's disease, it's going to be positive. Now, other things can make it turn positive, but if you got Alzheimer's disease, it will be positive. If that amyloid scan is negative, you don't, very unlikely you have Alzheimer's disease.
And I want to ask you more about what you said about your advice to other doctors in terms of listening to the patients, because I've heard several times too from other patients and families expressing like frustration about the doctor who seems to be like talking at the patient or talking to the patient's caregiver without acknowledging the patient. Like, do you have any thoughts about that? And what do you think that's?
I mean, we've been talking here for a while, and if you met me and didn't know, you wouldn't think I have anything wrong with me, right? But when I go, it's a problem I have when my wife comes with me, is that they want to talk to her instead of me, because they see on my chart MCI due to Alzheimer's disease, and I find them talking to her instead of me, kind of like you would if you had a kid and there with a mom, you'd talk to the mom, well, they're talk to her, I'll admit I probably did the same thing when I was in practice, but I've learned over the last 10 years that, because I would do also a talk, and people come up and talk to me later, and maybe the person would come up with Alzheimer's disease with the spouse. I obviously had Alzheimer's disease. The spouse would ask me a question, but I talked to the person. So I talked to them and answered the question. But I noticed that here, if my wife, she understands that I don't want her answering questions that she needs. So she says, you need to ask him, because a lot of the stuff she doesn't know. She doesn't keep up with my medicine and all that, because I do everything. I do the financial planning and the banking and all the travel stuff. And I do all that stuff ourselves.
And another frustration that, I've often heard from patients is that, when you receive a diagnosis, it often feels like you've just been given a death sentence, that, once you get Alzheimer's, like life is over. And that seems to be the message that they're getting from doctors. I wonder if you have any thoughts of that or yeah.
When I was diagnosed and when I was 60, which is 10 years ago, I really did not think that today, 10 years later, I thought I'd be dead from Alzheimer's. I thought, because I'd seen my brother go from diagnosis to dying in 7 or 8 years. My mother did the same thing. And I really thought that I would be in a memory center right now instead of being here talking to you. And it is a death sentence because you're going to die from Alzheimer's disease. And that's part of what you're going to die from, or complications from it. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. The Aduhelm's not going to stop it. It may slow it down. These healthy things won't keep me from dying from Alzheimer's disease. But it's going to, all these things have slowed it down, I think. And so I tell people it's like getting a diagnosis of terminal cancer. Now, most terminal cancer people have a short, limited time to live, 6 months or a year or 3 years or 2 years. But my brother got 8 years, my mother got 7. And it's not up. People don't get better like I did. It's a downward, they go down like this. And then if you've ever, those of us who've been around Alzheimer's, family members, they reach a point and it's downhill. It's just a big drop off and things go real fast. So that's now.
So how do you stay hopeful and optimistic from the day to day, knowing that, it just, the disease is just going to keep going down, declining?
Well, I talk about it. I freely, the moment that I was diagnosed, I decided I'll freely talk about it, because if people come up, I don't just go up to people and start talking about Alzheimer's disease. If they make a mistake of asking about Alzheimer's disease, I'll talk to them all day long about it. So I'm freely open with it. I deal with it that way. I stay busy, very active. I blog, I write, I read, I do gardening several days a week. I'm out with my grandkids, so I'm very active, and I've always been that way. And I think that helps too. I think that people, like I think when my brother was diagnosed and my mom was diagnosed, they're further along in the disease, and they may not really understand how bad it is. And then of course, people are afraid of being diagnosed. I think that's part of the problem with people getting diagnosed, is they know they have it, or they're worried they got it, and they're afraid to know that they got it. So that they're afraid to go in and get it evaluated. And there's a lot of denial that goes on from both the family, from both the patient and the family.
Right. And on that point, one of our viewers asked, how do you deal with the denial of a diagnosis of dementia? Any insights on that?
You have to be careful not to talk about people. But see, I don't have that problem because I've been very open, and my sons and my family, my family, I'm really open about it and talk about it. But I've seen denial in acquaintances. They don't believe the diagnosis, and but it is easier when you've had a really good diagnostic workup done, and you can plop that scan up and say, there it is. Because I've got someone I'm thinking of right now that doesn't think they have it, and the family doesn't think they have it, but I've seen their scans, and there's not much that shows on the scan like that, and that's probably what they have. But there's sort of a denial there, and I tried to talk to them about it in the past, but I finally just I don't talk about it anymore.
Right.
It's a hard thing to do, the denial. And denial is sometimes mainly, it's in family members, kids, daughters, sons. I understand that, but my family wanted to, with me, my family wanted to deal with that because they all know I got it, and I talk about it. They don't like for me to talk about it, but I'll read my blog because I know they read my blog, and I write about it. Because I write about sometimes about what I'm feeling that particular day about it. Because there's times during the year where, my brother's anniversary of his death or my mom's anniversary of her death, because they both died in the final stages. You get kind of down about it, but I cry. I sit here and cry on the computer sometime, but I get up and go on, stay busy. Because, for example, I had someone who has terminal cancer, a young person that contacted me, a former patient, and he just wanted to converse back and forth, through Facebook, and we did. And I said, you just have to, you have to go day by day and make the most out of your day. And that's what I try to do. I don't sweat the small stuff. I just try to, like today, I'm looking forward to do this, prepare for this talk. Tomorrow I'm gonna work in the garden. And then the next day I played with my grandkids, taking them swimming. So spent the weekend with my grand, so I'm staying busy. And so that's what you have to do. Whether you've got terminal Alzheimer's disease or whether you got terminal cancer or some other terminal disease, you have to make the most out of it. I enjoy every day. People aren't going to make me mad. I don't get mad anymore.
And Dr. Nash, I wanted to just to read out one of the paragraphs that you wrote for our audience on your blog post this morning.
Don't make me cry, though. Go ahead.
You wrote in a post, so the post was to let your readers know about the talk happening today. And at the end of the post, you wrote that my goal when I do these interviews or do a blog on Alzheimer's disease is to reach one person who needs help in getting the right advice on Alzheimer's, hoping they will get help or get their loved one help, or if they are a caregiver, to give themselves some help. And if I reach that one person, then it's all worth it. And that really spoke to me because, as a reporter and as a writer, writing about, news in this field and people's journey, I think that's my goal as a writer. Is that's the same for me as well, right? If it touches one person's heart, then it makes it all worth it, right? Right. Yeah. So,
right.
Yeah. I think, is there anything else, Dr. Nash, that you'd like to share, or maybe one piece of advice for families or patients who are along the same journey, living with Alzheimer's? Any piece of advice for them?
If they have memory issues, make sure they get a very thorough diagnosis and make sure that your diagnosis is correct. If they get this diagnosis, make sure early on that you've got all your ducks in the row, got your will done, your power of attorney for healthcare, your power of attorney, and all this paperwork you need to have done. If you are a caregiver, make sure that you reach out and get help, because you can't do it by yourself, and do that early on. All the Alzheimer's Association, no matter what state you live in, either Alzheimer's Association or the local Alzheimer's organizations, they have links and they have caregiver groups that I've talked to people who are caregivers. It's really helped. And you got to get help. They know where the respite programs are. And the other thing, if you get diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, we desperately need clinical people to participate in the clinical trials. And the benefits of it is what you see with me, is I've been able to get 27 infusions in a study that most of the people watching this can't get yet, even though it's approved by the FDA, because the system's not ready for it. But I'm going to be able to get it for 3 to 5 years before other people's going to be able to access it. And that's the main thing. And don't be afraid to get help. The caregivers, because I've seen relatives who wore themselves out or wearing themselves out being a caregiver. And one of my best friends died of Huntington's disease, but his wife early on took care of herself, and it made her get through his lengthy illness, his 7-year course of the disease before he died. And she got a lot of help. And so the caregivers are the ones that are getting lost through all this.
Fine. Got it. And thank you so much, Dr. Nash, for sharing your experience so openly. And
Sure, enjoy it.
for your insights. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us. I'll see you, Dr. Nash.
Thank you. Bye-bye.